Greetings travellers, and welcome to our 52nd excursion into Innsmouth. You join us today here in the foyer of the Gilman Hotel. I'm one of your guides, Rob Poynton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes.
And I think before we go upstairs to meet our guest today, we've just got a couple of very quick news items. We wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who backed the recent Innsmouth Gold Kickstart for the new Sword and Sorcery anthology. That's now in production. Should hopefully be out sort of mid-end of October, and we've got 11 new Sword and Sorcery stories in there from our usual stable of authors. Actually, a couple of new writers this time as well. And the other thing I just wanted to quickly mention was Innsmouth Essays is now out and available in paperback as well, and that's a collection of essays from the last year or so of Innsmouth news. Patrons to the show will be getting a free copy, either a PDF, or for those on the higher subscription rates, we'll actually be sending you a paperback copy of that book. So keep an eye out for that as well. Okay, Tim, do you want to lead the way up the stairs?
Indeed, yes. So we've got a guest lurking in, what room is it again?
428.
That's it. I can never remember the number.
The one with no lock on the door is always...
Yeah, the one with no lock on the door and a trouser press. Yeah. So let's hope that he's brought his little pocket screwdriver with him.
And here's our guest, David Hambling. Thanks for coming in, David. Very nice to see you.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. It's amazing to be here.
Great. And first visit to Innsmouth, is it this one?
Well, I don't know. The place seems very familiar. I think I've been here a number of times spiritually over the years. So I don't know. It does. It feels a bit like coming home. Is that a bit sinister? Do you think?
Check your neck for gills.
I wonder.
Scales under the armpits. You know.
It gets us all in the end.
But this is vintage Innsmouth, isn't it? This is the proper 1920s one.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like,
yeah, I don't think you'd want to visit it these days. I mean, but it's like all that area just be overdeveloped. It's like trying to find an unspoilt Cornish fishing village.
Oh,
these
yeah.
days.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder it's all sort of bistros and boutiques and everything now, perhaps, and probably third holiday homes and that kind of thing.
8 Starbucks on the high street.
Yeah. That's
McDonald's down where the old refinery used to be. Yeah.
Yeah, but even so, back down the little side alleyways, I bet there's still a bit of the old Innsmouth there.
You'd like to think so. I mean, it's always interesting going around places looking for odd remnants of history. But I suspect the population have all moved off to Brooklyn or somewhere, and they keep in contact via WhatsApp.
Oh man, that was good. Oh yeah, the Marsh Clan on Zoom.
Well, that's what it must all look like this day. I mean, that was one of the interesting things about Lovecraft, was that he was really bringing horror, sort of Gothic horror, into the modern age. Because before then, it was all ancient ruined monasteries and old castles and moors, which all seemed a bit old hat when they had aircraft and electric lights and things. And I think he was keen on bringing it into the modern era. So yeah, I think he'd approve of Zoom groups for Eldritch horrors.
And I think that there is that thing that we speak about quite a lot, was Lovecraft was almost a science fiction writer as much as anything. He gets pegged as horror.
And he was a scientist. He was a, like me, as it happens, he was a science journalist.
Yep.
As well as being a writer, and he did try and bring a lot of that into his work, even though you've got this over the top Gothic element in there. There's nuggets of science in there, and although he was in love with the past, but he was also very keen on on what science could do, even if the traces of it are sometimes spread a bit thin.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, perhaps we could start with that then. Something about your background and especially how you first got into Lovecraft and weird fiction.
I first got into Lovecraft in another century. Back in the day when you got books out of your library and they were these hardbacks with yellow covers on. And I was steadily working my way through the science fiction section of the local library and came across an ancient tome of Lovecraft. And I was absolutely hypnotized because, he has his flaws, but he has an absolutely hypnotic quality about him, an ability to conjure memorable scenes, even if he can't write dialogue or characters or anything else. But he has this almost hallucinogenic quality about him, about the way he envisages things, that, you know, those stories absolutely stay with you. You can forget short stories by everyone else, but you'll probably remember every one of his that you've read.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's something we've discussed before, isn't it? That while they may be light on character and that kind of thing, the atmosphere is so thick you could spread it on toast, you know.
And eat it.
Yes, and eat it. Yeah, you could chew it.
And I do think it's interesting sometimes when we go back to reread these stories. I think especially From Beyond we did a little while ago, just how actually short that story is. It's like sort of 6 pages or something, you know. It packs a lot in to a very small space. It's very, very dense.
He is. And a lot of it gets overlooked as well. I think because there's this incredible big picture, I think people often overlook some of the more interesting little details in there. So
you had an interest in science as well at that age, I presume, and then followed that into a career?
Yeah, indeed. And after a while of messing about with computers, I've ended up as a journalist full-time and fiction writer on the side.
Nice.
But as to what inspired me to start writing Lovecraftian fiction, I'd written a certain amount before and was getting nowhere because this was back in the days of conventional publishing and you just stack up a lot of rejections. And another thing that happened, we just moved to South London from North London. Now, I don't know if you're from these parts.
I'm East London.
Right, but there is...
Yeah.
I'm an outsider.
But there is a lot of prejudice about South London from North London, and I had all that, because basically everything is North London. You know, the Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, Madame Tussauds, the West End, everything. And South London is this wasteland with no history, no culture, and nothing worth seeing. And that was kind of the view that I came here with. But I gradually learned a bit about it, and my view began to change a bit. And then the culminating event was that where we are here, our garden backs onto some woodland, which belongs to a convent, Virgo Fidelis. And one day I noticed one of the ancient oak trees was leaning at an angle that it hadn't been before. And then the next evening, there was this incredible tearing, rending, crashing sound that went on and on and on. And the cat was terrified and ran upstairs and hid under the bed. And then it took a while. You could hear everything settling. It took a while to calm down. And then I went outside and found this oak tree had crashed right across most of our garden. It was huge. It destroyed a few trees on the way. And that got me thinking, wow, that's like a 200, 300-year-old tree. What has that seen? What is there in the roots of that tree? What is down there that's disturbed it? And you're thinking, this has been here a while. And it turns out that this patch of wood, convent wood, is actually part of the primeval Great Norwood. That used to be here. So that has actually been untouched there for thousands of years. And it did get me thinking a bit, what's there? This, which of course got me straight into a Lovecraftian vibe. Thinking about that, because if you're going to write stories about ancient lurking horrors, it does seem a bit crass to go reinventing the wheel when it's already been done so brilliantly, and so much of it is already there for you, and there's a world that you can hook into and build on rather than starting from scratch. But yeah, the other interesting thing was I had a guy around to quote for how much it would be to remove this vast tree trunk, and he said it would be about £1,000. And I thought, okay. And the next day it was gone. And my neighbour said, oh yeah, some blokes came and removed it. So clearly the nuns had arranged it and it had just gone. Wow. And they never said a word to me. And I thought, yeah, this does get a bit mysterious.
It's a bit weird, isn't it? Yeah.
It's almost like, was it ever really there in the first place? Was it a ghost of a tree?
Well, we kind of know it was, because it crushed a fruit cage and it said it destroyed a tree or two, and it left its mark. It did leave its mark there, yeah. So that was what then inspired me. And then when I found that online there's this fabulous thing called Ebooks and Self-Publishing, So rather than having to go through all the gatekeepers and just pile up rejections, you can just publish the damn thing yourself. And even if nobody reads it, you can get it out there. And I thought, this is wonderful. I need to write some Lovecraftian fiction. And then the other thing that struck me, being in Norwood as we are here, there's a place called Dulwich right next to us. And I was thinking, Dulwich, that's just too good not to use, isn't it? So, and I wasn't the first one to have this idea. So I wrote a story called The Dulwich Horror of 1927. The reason why I called it that is because there's already one called The Dulwich Horror.
Oh, is there?
Oh, I didn't realise that.
In fact, there's a couple of stories called The Dulwich Horror, and the title has been used for a number of other things as well. Someone wrote a study called The Dulwich Horror about property prices. And in the area, which I thought was a nice reference. And there's another
true horror.
There's another article you can find online which is about Boris Karloff called The Dulwich Horror because he was born in Dulwich.
Of course. Yes.
So, there's that idea has been around, but mine is The Dulwich Horror of 1927, which nicely pegs it into the right timeline. And it all sort of took off from there.
Yeah, it's a great story, that one. It's a great story, and because that's one of the first ones of yours that I read. I think
that was the right place to start because that was the first of the first.
Yeah, I don't think it was. I don't think it was the first one that I came across. I think the first one I came across was maybe Monsters of the Park. But I think it was because I'd just been reading a lot of C.J. Henderson. And I picked up Monsters of the Park on ebook because I was going away for a few days, and I was just, this fits perfectly because it's you got the gangsters and all that kind of business going on. So I was. But when I went back to the Dulwich Horror of 1929, a great story. I mean, what struck me was the amount of science in that. I thought that was really, really cool because I thought Lovecraft would have really appreciated that because he always liked to ground it in science. And it's like you took that and just sort of went, well, I could do more science. So
Gödel's incompleteness theorem hasn't really had a lot of fictional play, so I felt I'd balance that out a bit. But there's a certain amount of lightweight science. I mean, one of the issues with Lovecraft is that you're always fundamentally dealing with things which are incomprehensible. And I think you can't have things that make too much sense. It's tempting to do the traditional science fiction thing and explain everything. But I think when you're writing this style of fiction, you've got to have stuff which is unexplained and fundamentally baffling.
Oh, yeah.
Which kind of undermines that element. But then again, I do love the science, and the research always overtakes me. That I always end up reading far more books than I ought to in order to write something. Even on my sword and sorcery style one, War of the God Queen, that was supposed to. I thought, right, I'm going to write one which is all going to be made up. I'm not going to need to do any research at all. I'm just going to sit down and write it. And no, I'm there. Digging up on Sumerian history and goat husbandry and metallurgy and all manner of other things.
Forging swords and all that kind of business.
I'm just halfway through a sort of pirate sword and sorcery novel, and I've got about 8 pirate books and a couple of Osprey books about pirate ships, and it's you can very easily. I mean, it's because I'm that kind of nitpicking person that I hate it when people get things wrong, and I like to get things right. So, and these days, particularly with Google, when you can find it all out there, there's very little excuse for some of the rubbish. I mean, you've got to forgive writers from the past, particularly the more imaginative ones. But these days, I like to see things done proper. And I think it speaks to something which Lovecraft did himself, and I noticed a lot, especially I've just finished the second Harry Stubbs book, which I'm really enjoying, and I like that you do that thing of real people and fictional people, and it's all blended in very nicely, in much the same as Lovecraft did with the Necronomicon, and then which cults, which is real, which is fake. It lends it a veracity,
There's a lot of that, because a lot of it is inspired by local history and local characters, and the fact that Madame Blavatsky really did live a few hundred yards away from here for a brief period, and all these people were around. And there's a map on the Facebook page of Shadows from Norwood. Showing where all the places are that are mentioned, and you can go and have a pint in the Conquering Hero and have breakfast in the Electric Cafe and things.
Excellent.
That's cool.
So I like having it all grounded in the real. Obviously, you're limited by the number of characters you've got around the place, but I haven't run out yet, and we have got some pretty decent ones about.
Well, it's quite an interesting thing that Lovecraft obviously had his fictional setting laid over the real New England. But I found, we were going out and about and doing Innsmouth excursions to little places here and there of interest, little sort of video reports. And even within striking distance of this village, there's an Iron Age hill fort. There was the site of a big Viking battle. There's a place where, Henry VIII's wife was imprisoned and another queen had her head cut off just up the road. You don't have to look very far in the UK to find these layers of history.
I mean, this is kind of my theory with Shadows from Norwood, is that wherever you are, if you dig a little bit, even if it looks like boring South London, you start finding all this amazing stuff under your feet you never knew was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sinister or otherwise.
This is it.
If it's a sinister, you can make it sinister. Yeah.
Well, yes, exactly.
A lot of it is, though, isn't it? It's those stories that people remember, isn't it? It's like, because I go around the Sussex countryside a lot, go walking, that kind of thing. And you're amazing. Everywhere has got a story about a white or a barrow or a murder, or this is the devil's humps, and this is the devil's this, and this is the devil's dyke is just up the road. So
and it's nice when you can take those, and it doesn't always take much to give them a Lovecraftian twist, because again he used a lot of that. I mean, Salem and all those things, even the standing stones in New England, and just lays his own thing over that. So
yeah, I mean, he wasn't really working with much material there, because really mainly what he had was allegations of witches, and a little bit of archaeology, but there was very little known about the area at the time. But he managed to do a lot with it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas over in this country, we do far better for that kind of thing. So we have a much richer palette to work from.
And so with the Harry stuff, obviously we've got the setting because that's local to you and it's an area you know. What made you set your stories in the 20s? Is it just to purely tie in with the Lovecraftian age as such?
That's one aspect of it. Another aspect is that I like the language. You do get a far more varied vocabulary when you're in that period. You can talk about rambunctious and use all kinds of words that just that are practically extinct in modern conversation. So the chance to use that as a prose style, I just find enchanting. So I do like that. The other thing I like is the distance. Because it's a fascinating era, but it's an era of great scientific discovery and social change. And everyone thinks they're so modern and they think that they've come so far. And now seeing it from a century on, we take a different perspective on that. But then maybe that also makes us think, so how are people in a century's time going to think about us?
Yeah.
So I like having that distance and that ability to look down on them while at the same time realizing other people might be looking down on us. So it's all of those things. But I do like the period, and I've got to say I like there's a lot of absolutely stonking culture around there because this is still at the 1920s. You've still got Conan Doyle around and writing. H.G. Wells was still writing. Agatha Christie was just getting going. All these people, and it's such a fascinating blend, and you can borrow lots of elements from all of them, and people like P.G. Wodehouse, who was another Dulwich one.
Which is one of my inspirations.
Exactly,
because I do a lot of stuff set in that era because I want to go down that whole Bertie Wooster kind of route with mine. But
also that time you got kind of the birth of science fiction going on there too, or modern science fiction. But you've also got the Theosophists and the Golden Dawn and Crowley's knocking around that big occult revival as well.
Yeah.
And also wonder if it's like it's almost strikes me as the first decade of the modern age. We've got cars, we've got phones,
and we've got modernism.
Yes, and surrealism,
and this whole idea that we are going to cast aside the past and we're going to. And I would like to see Lovecraft as, in his way, a part of that. I mean, there's a load of references to TS Eliot's The Wasteland in Dulwich Horror, and there's this. It's almost a running joke in the Harry Stubbs. People keep asking him if he's read The Wasteland.
Yes.
Because I think that's got a lot of the same sort of ideas as Lovecraft, because it's looking backwards, but it's also very much trying to project things into the modern age. And there's also a certain revulsion at the modern age, which I think Eliot and Lovecraft shared.
Yeah.
So I think there's, and also because they're both massive classicists and they love dropping in lots of classical allusions. So I think the Wasteland is quasi Lovecraftian in its way. I mean, I would see it perhaps as a grimoire, because it's basically a mysterious text, which is almost magical in places. It almost seems like it's an incantation in places, and I suspect that. If you could read that, people imagine these ancient books are very cut and dried. I don't think they are. I think they're a lot more mysterious, and you have to work them out. And I think that's what you see in The Wasteland.
Yeah. And I think Lovecraft as well, that he was very much taken up by sort of existentialists, and he became part of that movement, I think particularly in France. I mean, I don't know if there was a direct connection, but Camus wrote The Outsider, right? And it seemed to be something very much in the air at that time. The person who's alienated from modern society.
Yes.
I suppose with Lovecraft, he had that, seeing himself as an 18th century gentleman or whatever was one way he sort of brought that out. But then also this idea of just being detached from humanity in general seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of his fiction as well.
Oh, alienation was very much a thing of the 1920s, wasn't it? They just discovered this whole idea of being detached from the world. And I don't know if that was because all these traditional values were being uprooted in a way that hadn't happened. And I think the future then had suddenly become very uncertain, because for previous centuries, yes, particularly you get this sense of accelerating change, particularly coming into the 19th century when you suddenly got steam trains and things. But it's exploding in the 1920s when you've got radio and cinema, and suddenly motor cars go from being incredibly rare to being very common. All the horse-drawn vehicles are being replaced with motor vehicles. You've got aircraft flying overhead. And, the world is suddenly being transformed, and nobody really knows where it's all going. And I think that would have led a lot of people to feel very alienated from the world. And then that gives rise to all sorts of literary and cultural movements like Lovecraft.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose a sense of democratization as well, because suddenly working people began getting access to these things, and some of the old social structures started looking a bit shaky.
Oh, the Bolshevists.
Yes, well, there was that threat as well, wasn't there? And the rise of fascism as well, which is perhaps a response to that, almost pulling everyone back. Well, I suppose both sides on that argument were very collective, weren't they? Well,
Lovecraft's view was that he didn't particularly like Hitler, but he thought he was better than the Bolshevists, so he'd give him his tentative support.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were thinking that. Curious that, divided, polarised society, rapid changes, no one knows where it's going.
Surely that could never happen again.
Sound familiar at all?
I also wanted to ask you with the Harry Stubbs, I don't know if it's me, did I spot quite a few little Easter eggs in there? Like things like "You'll Never Leave" and just various other nice little peppermint little references, which I always enjoy.
There are lots of them, some more obvious than others. There's a lot of plain in-jokes, which people wouldn't necessarily get. But the opening, I mean, just some trivial ones. The opening of The Old Rice, where he goes, "It will be necessary here to explain." Or rather, "It will be convenient here to explain." And he goes on to talk about previous events. I mean, that's actually... quite a chunk of that is taken straight from Shackleton's own book, South.
Right.
Just because I like the style and I'm trying to get into that voice for it.
Right.
Or there's, other things like in Broken Meats, because there is a very strong Fu Manchu influence in there. when he finally encounters the villain, the line that the villain speaks is actually the first line Fu Manchu speaks in the Fu Manchu books.
Nice.
So, there's all these little winks and nods around the place, most of which I've forgotten by now. But I think it gives it all some texture that it wouldn't otherwise have when you're weaving all that into it. I think it gives it a bit of body.
And your character Yang really stood out for me as well. Did you do a lot of research into sort of Chinese martial arts culture for that?
It's more about Taoism, which has been an interest of mine for a while.
Yeah.
But yes, I read a certain amount of that. Yes, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Kung Fu Hustle.
Yes.
Yeah.
The villain in that, is he Brother Sung? Something like that. That's how I envisage Yang, as being a very cool Chinese dude in a linen suit.
Because that was an interesting period in Chinese history as well. You had almost that clash of cultures, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Shanghai was a Western city.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of Western architecture there still. But you did have all the Western money and know-how pouring into that. And then interacting with the local Chinese culture, and China was in a state of utter turmoil. So there was a lot of interesting stuff going on there, and I did want to bring that whole Chinese thing in, and of course it's an opportunity to, as I say, do this Fu Manchu thing in reverse.
Nice. No, I was going to say, because that's something that has always stood out for me in the Harry Stubbs was the supporting characters. I mean, my absolute favourite, I can't figure the name of him off the top of my head, is the Fixer. The local
Arthur.
Arthur. That's it.
Arthur Renville.
Of course.
And of course he's called Arthur, because why is he called Arthur? Because he's a local guy who deals in dodgy goods, who has an ex-boxer as a minder.
Minder, yeah. Well, that's how I got the theme song in my head at one point. And I was like, I think it popped in my head before I'd consciously realised what was going on.
Yes. Yeah. He's a pivotal character. And I think he opens up lots of opportunities to connect with things, because he knows everyone and he's part of everything that happens in his version of Norwood. So the other interesting thing about him is that Harry has a very rosy view of him, because he's Harry's patron and he helps his family out and stuff. He would never describe Arthur as a gangster, but I think other people might.
Yes. Yeah.
And he's a very nice guy, and he does a lot to help widows and orphans and anyone who's in trouble. But I think if you got on the wrong side of him, someone might break your legs rather quickly.
But this speaks to that whole Cray thing. That's why it rings true again.
That's why I was going to ask. Was there a bit of the Cray?
They were nice to their mums, and they
were nice to their mother, and looked after all the old ladies in the Women's Institute.
Well, Arthur isn't that sort of gang. I mean, I see him as he's an honest, hard-working crook. He's a decent bloke. He knows that he has to keep everyone around him sweet, and he knows that the organisation only works if you keep everyone on board and make sure that things are spread around. And he's not actually a bad person, but he's living in difficult times, so he has got an edge to him. So I don't think he's quite as nice as Harry might think, but I don't think he's quite as nasty as he could be either.
But that, again, speaks to that earlier breed of gangster, if you call them that, your Jack Spots and the earlier ones who were more kind of grew out of the community almost. And even going back to the Chinese triads, they were almost originally a self-defense for the community as much as anything.
They were a resistance movement. Interestingly, the mafia started the same way. They started off as a resistance movement against, I believe, French occupation. Except when the enemy goes away, the organisation hangs around. Or we've seen not dissimilar things happen to elements of the IRA as well. Starts off as purely a resistance organisation, but some elements go rogue and become gangsters and use their contacts and the skills that they have to bad ends. So
you're a columnist for Fortean Times.
Indeed, yes.
My copy of which arrived yesterday. I've been a subscriber for a while now. So it's one of those things I never really connected. It's odd, isn't it? You see the name and it can't be the same guy. Oh, it is.
Yeah, there are a few David Hamblings around, but there's not that many. So yes, I've been writing the science page for them for umpteen years. And you never run out of things because there's always something strange out there.
Yes. Well, the magazine as itself has been going, since the 60s? Sort of late 60s, early 70s or something?
So I think it certainly goes back to the 70s. Yeah. It's and it's interesting how it all evolves over time. And the obsessions go from aliens to ghosts to whatever, to, cryptozoology and whatever the latest thing is. Yeah, someone I don't know if you saw, but someone started a conversation about middle-aged moulders and this problem that people of our generation in particular, who were so entranced with all these mysteries in the, back in the 90s or whenever, and are now feeling middle-aged and disillusioned with it all as it all falls apart. And, everything that they'd been interested in turns out to have a mundane explanation to it.
Yeah. I suppose that's something that goes in cycles, isn't it? Because if we go back to the 20s or just a little bit earlier, we've got that wave of spiritualism. And
as you say, that was something that people got very disenchanted with that first time around when they discovered how much it was fraud. But then, particularly the Great War is supposed to have been a big factor with people losing family and wanting to contact them, and then suddenly it all comes back.
Just look at all the ghost hunting shows. I mean, there's just dozens of them. And
I was going to say, it's like it goes in waves. Because there was a big resurgence in the 90s of all these ghost hunting TV shows, and then they kind of fell off a bit. And now they seem to be coming back again. And I don't know why, but it's like, it's strange how it goes in waves with that kind of thing. But I think, socio-political climate, uncertainty of life, people dying all over the place,
Well, it did strike me. I can't remember which Victorian novelist it was who starts, he has a character walking down a darkened lane and feeling a bit scared. And then he thinks, well, hang on, in the last 5,000 years, no one has come up with any real evidence for ghosts. Why should I be scared of them? And I'm thinking, wow, that's not the kind of view that you would associate with people from that period. But clearly, even then, his view was there's been an awful lot of opportunity to find evidence and no one's actually come up with any. Yeah. But try telling kids that these days.
Well, it's one thing where you're alone in the dark in a creepy old house, isn't it, I suppose?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's something primal within. I guess it's that thing of what's beyond the glow of the fire, isn't it? That's where the monsters lurk.
Yes, I mean that's always. I always find that one of the fascinating things about horror fiction, in particular, when you're trying to do this transition from the daylight world, when it all seems ridiculous and laughable, and then as the sun goes down and the shadows lengthen and the wind blows in the trees, then suddenly it doesn't seem all so quite unbelievable at all. And doubts start to creep in. And then you find you're in a very different world then when you're on your own in the dark than when you are chatting to friends in bright light.
Yeah. And that's something I think M.R. James uses very well, because most of his protagonists are, this is all nonsense. I'm not listening to these silly superstitions. Oh, my God, it's a tarantula in the shape of a man. And it's like a double whammy, because if you think that might be there, perhaps it's less of a shock. I don't know.
Yeah. A good example of that is the one, I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head. It's where a guy goes to a village and he goes out for a walk and he's just walking across the fields and he goes up this hill and this old bit that this people were talking about as being a bit creepy. And he's like, I'll be fine. And he's there and he's fine. And then the sun starts going down and he gets really freaked out and runs off. I can't remember the name of it now, but I think that's a really great example of that, of like when it's all sunny and bright.
Yeah, that's exactly that phenomenon. Interesting with vampires, isn't it? That they're powerless in daylight. In daylight, you're fine; you can laugh at them.
Yeah,
but when it gets dark, that's when you're in trouble. In daylight, you can dig them up and put a stake through them. In the dark, though, it's all turned round and you become the prey.
And yet almost every film, they set out for the castle at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
When sunset. Oh, yeah. We'll plenty of time. We'll
I'd probably stop and have a cup of tea or a drink on the way.
Yeah, and the sun just reaches the horizon.
But Lovecraft kind of took that. And I mean, in Lovecraft, we do get the trappings of cemeteries and old buildings and that kind of stuff. But then, even if you believed in ghosts, what Lovecraft presents us with is something even way beyond that. We're on another level of disbelief altogether.
Well, if you, I mean, is it the Shunned House? I think that's his take on a haunted house story.
Yeah.
Only instead of going for the traditional ghosts, he goes for something a bit more modern and a bit more, one might hesitate to say scientific, but it's a very good. But I love the idea that his hero goes in there, I think, with a Crookes generator device which was absolutely the latest technology of the time to blast it with electromagnetic waves.
Yeah.
And it sort of escalates from there. But yeah, I think Lovecraft he had an interest in that, but he didn't want to just do plain ghosts or vanilla vampires. So Charles Dexter Ward, I would say, is his go at a vampire story.
Yeah.
I think that's his reworking of it. And well, yes, and if you look at the Mi-Go, the abominable snowman,
yes,
they're extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
You know, he turns everything into a very strange dimension, but one that is less supernatural and more natural. We just don't understand it.
Yeah. And I think in that story, didn't he have the guy lugging around the latest wax cylinder recorder?
Yes,
That's like great. Imagine it like a sort of wardrobe. I think almost this guy's carrying.
It's a bit of a change from a Walkman, isn't it? You know.
But he's using cutting edge technology.
Exactly. Yeah, he was very interested. Yeah, and in something like Mountains of Madness, there's a lot of cutting edge technology. I mean, he was talking about things that the explorers of the day could only dream of having, of being able to drill and get around and examine things. So he liked that. That was, it's very much the thing of its time. In that he was looking forward in many ways, but looking forward to something rather threatening.
I always wondered about the Shunned House with all the kit, whether that was a nod to Carnacki, Hope Hodgson, because he had his electric pentangle. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's of the time, isn't it? Because you start, I suppose Frankenstein was the first one to start that idea of science as horror. Science gone wrong, or man meddling in things that he shouldn't be meddling in?
I'm not. For me, I think Frankenstein is very much of its age, and I'm a bit sceptical about claim because it's quasi-religious. It's all about the ethics of it and the viewpoints, and there's the whole scientific thing. I think is very much glossed over. Yeah. Even if she didn't use electricity. But the way the movies clearly decided to make it more exciting.
I think when you see it in the movies, there's much more made of that sort of setup in the lab, isn't
but
it?
But also, in the book, the monster is incredibly agile and hops around like anything. And vegetarian. But clearly in the movies, they decided to make him more of a menacing, monstrous type figure. But the original, obviously it's a pioneering work. But I hesitate to put it in the science fiction camp. If she could have used other methods and to do that, but was it galvanism was in the headlines, so she just borrowed that.
Yeah. And I guess there's another Boris connection there.
Yes,
William, Mr. Pratt. I believe you can see why he changed his name, I suppose.
Yes.
And wasn't he also in the? What was the? Was it Die Monster Die? Wasn't it? Was a sort of loose Lovecraft adaptation?
Oh, which one was that?
It was a loose adaptation of The Colour Out of Space. It was actually Karloff's last ever film, just before he died. He was pretty much wheelchair bound for most of it. Mm-hmm. It's fun, but obviously because it's Karloff, it's been transplanted to an English village, and he's in a big old manor house. But they've still got the blasted heath down the road and all that, and one of his staff has been using the meteorite to grow his plants in the greenhouse. So you got a bit of the Triffids getting in there. So you got some good, really dodgy 50s killer plant action going on. I enjoy it. I think it's a good film.
So you also mentioned Sword and Sorcery, David. Have you?
Yes, indeed. This is as you may recall, if you've read the Dulwich Horror of 1927, there is a character, Jessica, who unfortunately ends it by falling through an abyss that opens up in the ground and is apparently never seen again. However, all the other characters in that, out of the 7 of the friendship, they all pop up in other stories or have bits of their own. And I felt she's been a bit hard done by. She needs a story of her own. So I was wondering, where was she falling to in this abyss that had been opened up by Cthulhu? So she ends up 3,000 years ago in the Bronze Age, alone and being captured by this group of, I guess you'd call them Cthulhu cultists, whose idea is that she's going to be a host mother for Spawn of Cthulhu, which she doesn't really take to the idea. Funnily enough, promptly escapes and sets out to befriend the local nomads and try and raise an army to do something about these nasty people and hopefully find a way back through the portal home. And then immediately runs into all kinds of problems, because this is my reaction to everything from a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court to John Carter of Mars and the rest of it, because this idea that you are the white savior, you turn up and you are immediately in charge and you can rule the natives. And she finds that when you don't speak the language, have no fighting skills, and are in a culture where women are viewed as property, you've got a bit of an uphill struggle.
I'm going to have to get hold of that, because obviously I've read all the other ones about all the other characters, because I've got the collection, I've got the hardback of it, and so I'm going to have to get that, because I did wonder right at the end of it, because the last story in the collection was about the girl that went mad,
Sophie.
Sophie, that's it.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh well, wonder what happened to Jessica. So I'm going to have to get that.
And there she is.
I'm going to have to get that. Yeah.
And very slight spoiler, she realizes that she's not going to be able to do a lot on her own. So she persuades the nomads to bust out a group of other women who have been captured, having been abducted from various historical periods.
Oh, nice.
And use their collective abilities to somehow forge an army and win against the Spawn of Cthulhu. Unkillable, I'm afraid. Like Cthulhu, you can run over them with anything and splatter them, but they simply reassemble themselves rather quickly, which does make them very difficult to deal with. I mean, particularly if you're only using Bronze Age technology, but it wouldn't be easy with anything. So it was interesting. It gave me a chance to have a go at a different genre and different style of things.
And did that involve a lot more research?
Tons, yeah.
Because you want to get all the...
Yeah, you want to get all the details right.
And the right things,
so checking out a lot of archaeology and things like that. And it's...
But is there also a thing, as I'm sort of researching Dark Ages at the moment, just as the Romans left Britain, with the thought of using that as a setting.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, because there's not a lot that is known, it gives you a little bit of elbow room.
Yes, I've deliberately picked a spot which is just off the edge of what was about to become the Assyrian Empire. So basically, there's not a lot there. We don't know much about the history of it. So there's certainly room for a few more unknown cities and civilizations around the place. But the basic setup is entirely historically legitimate if you overlook the invasion by cosmic monsters.
Which might happen.
This is the other thing. The great thing about Spawn of Cthulhu is they don't leave any fossil trace, so who knows?
I feel like I'm letting the side down now, because I'm researching 1990s swimming pools. That's what I'm researching at the minute.
Now, if you were talking 1970s swimming pools, I could tell you some horror stories.
I'm researching the filtration system of an early 1990s swimming pool at the minute. It's just like, I feel
but it shows you've got a commitment to getting it right, though.
This is it. Well, I'm just worried that there'll be somebody out there who'll go, that's not the filtration system they used back then.
And there will be as well. We've spoken about that before. And you said they had these buttons, but actually the buttons are round and they had
can't you have your filtration unit being built by an eccentric inventor?
Oh, now there's an idea, isn't there? There we go.
It's,
I like it.
Made to his own design.
His own design. Yeah, that old Back to the Future hand waving. It's all to my own design.
It makes the whole pool shimmer with a sort of violet light.
Oh, no, there is a lot of that going on in it, but there's a different reason for that. It's not the filtration unit.
Oh, it's not the filtration unit now.
No, that's not what's causing it. No, yeah.
I go to all that trouble with the filtration unit, and that's not where the problem is.
But do you find when you write in different periods, it's in a way it's liberating, in a way it's a challenge, because I can think of a few stories where if they'd have had mobile phones, that blows the whole plot.
Yeah, that's another reason for not liking the modern era, because things like mobile phones, I think you have to work. I'm sure it can be done, but it makes it an awful lot easier if you don't. It's like horror movies these days. They've got people, first thing that happens is they've got to pick their phone up and find they've got no signal.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons I set a lot of my stuff in Cornwall, because everybody knows you can't get a signal in Cornwall.
Right. So, and I think there is a lot of potential to use mobile phones for horror, and even the internet for this, because it means you can discover things.
I've done quite a lot of that as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But generally, it does. You'll never get a movie which consists of someone sitting at his computer and doing all the connections and emailing people and finding everything out. You've got to actually go out and talk to people for it to work as a story.
Yeah.
And that's an awful lot easier to do in 1927 than it is in 2022. Because, as a journalist, this is as I say, this is science fiction to me, this fact that I can just be sitting at my desk and, I can see a scientific paper written by someone in China and, I can download it and automatically translate it. And if I find something interesting, I can send an email off to the guy who wrote it and get answers to questions. And, this is back in the 1920s, that would have been 6 months to go there and get, and you probably end up having to go to Shanghai to talk to the guy because the post is so unreliable. Whereas, now the world is very much smaller and the connections are very much there. Whereas in 1920s, you really have no idea what there is even quite close to me. There's one little joke in the Elder Ice, because he's invited round for tea by a Welsh professor, and he's a bit alarmed because he's heard that the Welsh eat seaweed.
Yes, yeah. That made me laugh.
Because they're these strange, odd people.
Yeah, that made me laugh, that did.
Yeah, that was actually a joke with my dad, because he was Welsh, and every time we went to Wales, he would always make a point of having lava bread.
Yeah.
But you say that, but then I saw an interview with some American school kids not that long ago, a few years, who were on a school trip to France, and they'd packed their bags with food. Because in France all they eat is snails. They don't have any other food over there. So maybe America's an exception.
I think America. Well, this is what this running joke. All the Americans in tourists all eat at McDonald's.
Yeah,
because it's something they recognise.
Yeah.
But you don't have to, because these days with the internet and the power of Amazon, you can have anything you want brought to your door
tomorrow.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
it's mad, isn't it?
You can just have it tomorrow.
And if you do come across a strange and mysterious statuette, you take a picture, Google image search. Oh, that's Cthulhu.
Yeah. So how was that? How was this information? Is it becoming an information overload? I noticed things like videos are getting shorter and shorter. Now we're down to these little 10-second snippets.
I still don't see the point in them at all.
So how does that affect journalism, and how does it affect writing? You think, does it make it almost impossible to write in the modern age and still maintain that unknown quality to things?
I wonder if, as writers, our big threat now comes from the moving image, much more so than ever before, because a few years ago, when you saw people sitting on trains or wherever, they'd be opening a book or a magazine.
Yeah.
These days, we've all got mobile devices, and they might be reading a book or a magazine on it, but they can see Game of Thrones as well.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about the Lord of the Rings, and that is now seen by people as a movie franchise, and the logical extension for that is not, let's see if we can persuade Tolkien's estate to let someone write another book. No, it's we've got to make some more movies or have a gigantic multi-billion-dollar television series based on it. And it's interesting the number of people that I'm with who I talk to as writers, and that basically their ambition is to turn up on the screen.
I was going to say that, because is that, you know, in one sense, it's like you think, yeah, imagine if my book was sold as a film, and, you know, and they put in Pierce Brosnan or something or whatever, you know, whoever you want cast in it. Like maybe Jason Statham for Harry Stubbs, perhaps.
Yeah. There are people. Yeah. I mean, as you know, there are people who will go through and say, "Oh, and in my book, I see this character as this character as this," and you know, it is all seen. And I admit, I have shot myself in the foot there by talking about Kung Fu Hustle earlier, but that was just an example.
Yeah, but I used Idris Elba in my Dulwich trilogy.
Yeah.
But then, what do you see as, I mean, do you have any sort of favourite Lovecraft movie adaptations, or do you think some people say it's unfilmable? Do you think there have been some successful ones?
I think it's unfilmable. But I thought The Colour Out of Space was a very brave effort, and I liked what they did with it. I went in there being absolutely prepared to hate it, but I thought, and possibly because it's Nick Cage, I thought this is actually quite good. They have picked this up and run with it and gone in their own direction, and they've made it into something. So I thought that was good. But no, I think he's basically unfilmable, and if you tried to do any straight adaptations of his stuff, it would be dead on the screen, because it's not written as a movie. It's not written as a screenplay. It is written as a high verbiage novel, and it works on the page, and it works when it's got the reader using their imagination. And when he's talking about things which are, you know, indescribably horrible or sanity bending, when you just see them, that's not something that's ever going to translate to the screen. Because it's, you know, and at best it will be icky, at worst it's going to be laughable. So I see them as being, you know, different realms. And while, you know, it's nice to see people having a go at it, the definitive Lovecraft is always going to be what's on the page, which is why it's so alarming with Lord of the Rings, when you think the definitive version is no longer what's on the page.
It's now... Viggo
Mortensen
and Andy Serkis did a good job, I think, but
he did a fantastic job, but I don't know if he was my Gollum.
Yeah, this is it, isn't it? I think the best adaptations of Lovecraft, hands down, have got to be the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society's Dark Adventure Radio Theatre ones.
Yes,
because it works so well as audio drama.
Yes,
it's like Doctor Who. The big Finnish audio dramas that have been going since like 2003, they are leaps and bounds better than the current TV series, because it works great in that audio format, because you don't have to worry about the special effects being a bit crap. No. You can put whatever you like there.
Absolutely. You can focus on the characters and the dialogue and the story, which is how it's meant to be, without having the limitations of, they're in the same gravel pit again.
Yeah, they're in that old China clay quarry down in Dorset. that one that...
you can conjure up a giant alien landscape with craters made out of green crystal, and people listening will see it. Whereas if you tried to do that on the screen, people would think, that looks a bit tacky.
Yeah.
More Bako foil and bubble wrap.
Polystyrene.
And we were talking earlier about this, because Tim was saying like his favourite story is the Willows. And if you film that, it's basically some men standing by some trees that are waving around,
moving about.
Absolutely. The other thing I did want to talk about was which is fun, which is one of the great writing things I've enjoyed, is I've done a number of collaborative anthologies with other authors, each of whom has their own Lovecraftian series. So the idea is we take a theme, an object, a person, and we then have that moving between the different stories. So you've got C.T. Phipps with his, I think he calls it it's a post-apocalyptic westerns through Armageddon series.
They're fun.
And Matt Davenport, who has his Andrew Doran series, is basically Indiana Jones.
Yep.
Only he works for Miskatonic University.
Nice.
So you've still got the Nazis, but the monsters are all Mythos ones. And that's just tremendous fun, seeing the way everyone does their own thing with it. But we manage, I mean, it's a bit like herding cats sometimes, but you can more or less keep people into the same sort of story.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those because I've got the Tales of the Alazith, the Book of Yig, and the Yog-Sothoth one, Tales of Yog-Sothoth.
Yep.
Is there any more than that, or is it just those three at the moment?
So that's the Yog-Sothoth, the Book of Yig. There's another one coming out shortly, and there's another one after that as well.
Oh, brilliant! Which I enjoyed them immensely. So yes. I'm looking forward to more of that. Yeah.
There's another collection, Time Loopers, which I didn't. The aim wasn't. It wasn't supposed to be Mythos, but everyone else said, "Oh yes, this has got to be Mythos." But that's Time Loopers: 4 Tales from a Time War, which is all stories involving time looping.
Isn't that inspired by Time Tunnel?
No, it's well, I go into it in the start. It's based on a lot of things, but my segment is basically Groundhog Day with assault weapons.
Nice.
In which the character he's been given this time looping ability in order for him to commit a murder, and as payment he can keep whatever he can make out of it. So he figures out a way looping by gambling online to make a large amount of money. And his then challenge is to carry out this murder. Only there are, as they say, complications.
Awesome.
And then because everyone else wanted to go that way, that's a little bit Mythos. But the rest of the stories are very much familiar Lovecraftian time traveling entities around.
But it's what working in Lovecraftian or the Mythos in particular allows you to do this, because you can apply it to any era, any setting. I was going to say universal, cosmic, I suppose, in its scope. So is there any particular setting you could think of that you haven't used that you'd like to use, any time or any place?
I think I haven't done much in the modern age, and I've certainly got a few ideas for things that would work in that. And also there's a few eras between the 1920s and now. I think it might be particularly interesting to play around with the 1970s, an era which I just about remember, and to do that as historical fiction. I mean, I think life is short. This is the problem. You only get to write so many books, and I have a lot more ideas for books than I have time to write them. So there's another Stubbs 1920s one on the way, and the War of the God Queen, that has to be a trilogy, because it's a rule they've always got to be trilogies.
Of course.
And having done the first two, it's kind of I want to write the one which is going to tie up all the loose ends and finish it off and put in all the scenes that I didn't manage to get into the other ones. So I've got a certain amount on the plate already without you giving me ideas about other things.
Yeah.
That's why sometimes I start thinking of something. I think, no, I've got to just push that away because I've got to finish this first. It's always easy to start a new project up, isn't it? But
the siren lure of new projects, as opposed to the dull, boring drudgery
actually finishing one
that you've got 2/3 of the way through. Yeah,
because it's intense work, right? Just writing the thing is one thing, but then going back and redrafting and editing and then adding bits in and taking bits out.
I can't tell you how many drafts City of Sorcerers went through. That was supposed to be a quick one, but it went through at least 7 drafts, and bits of it just kept getting rewritten until it finally came right. But it would be great to be one of these people who can write 10,000 words a day and just do it all on the first draft, and put out a novel every 6 weeks or whatever. But for me, one a year is very good going. It's and with all the research.
Yes, and then for me, it's always the proofing and correcting. I've just put another non-fiction book out and got the copies back from the printer. It was a bit of a rush job because I'm going to an event at the weekend that I wanted to take them to sell, and of course, 3 or 4 pages in, two mistakes. This has been read a dozen times.
There's always at least one.
The only way. Yeah, the only way to find an error is to have the book printed.
Absolutely,
and then it will just leap off the page at you.
Yeah, that happened exactly to me with that Musketeers Cthulhu thing, and it was in the bloody introduction. It was right there. It was like the second paragraph or something. I was like, oh, come on.
Do you think, was it one that anyone else would have noticed, do you think?
I noticed.
Yeah.
Because I went, it's not just me. So, but going back to that and thinking about technology, there's a lot of stuff going around now with AI artwork and Midjourney in particular.
Yes.
And there's some people have expressed concern that this is the end of artists. I mean, as a musician, we kind of went through the same thing.
Who was that guy who said this is the end of painting? That was in about 1860 something, wasn't it? At the first photograph. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. We had it when synthesizers came in. There were going to be no more orchestras and all the rest.
Well, it happened before that. It happened with the Mellotron, with the Moody Blues. It was Nights in White Satin. Musicians were up in arms because they'd done this orchestral thing on this box. They were like, it's killing our careers.
So I wonder, are we going to see AI stories and books and writings, perhaps? I wonder if that's going to be the next development.
I certainly think you're going to see an increasing number of AI artworks, but I think that's going to sit alongside. Like every time you add one of these new technologies, I mean, synth music is still there. It just exists as a separate genre. Photography hasn't displaced painting. We've got them side by side. So I think these things will all, television hasn't replaced radio. But I mean, yes, I think there's a risk that you're going to get even more fragmentation. As to the fiction writing thing, that's a scary thought, isn't it?
It is.
But ultimately, I'd have to say yes. I believe AI inherently has the capability to do pretty much anything. And stringing together words in a way that's going to sell books is a bit of a formulaic process anyway. Certainly when you read some of the stuff that's out there.
Well, for some genres, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And for the successful books in all the commercial genres do tend to be a rearrangement of familiar elements. I don't know if you've ever seen a thing called Plotto, which is a famous book, which is basically it's a technique for assembling stories. It gives you all the plot elements and you can pick any genre, and it then tells you how to select those and put them. So it's kind of a proto AI story generating system.
Right.
But I think that was written in the 1920s and claims to be able to generate endless stories on themes. So again, I think the idea is there and I think it can work.
You've already got things like Grammarly and all that things that basically go through and check the grammar and everything. So if you were to put in the blocks and then use one of these editors to go through it, it's possible.
Well, it's like having these filters, isn't it? So you can take your photograph and you can put it through a Dali filter to turn it, or a Picasso filter, or an Impressionist filter.
Make yourself look less old.
So I think I suspect you'll have that with text. You'll just put in you'll put in the basic header and say, right, okay, I'm going to write this in the style of Lovecraft or Edgar Allan Poe or whatever, and
And to a large extent, it's already happened with popular music nowadays, which is very formulaic and mostly done in the studio and everything else.
I think people have been saying that for a while, but yes, certainly there's...
They've been saying this since the 60s.
I do remember people muttering... complaining about these manufactured groups.
Well, the Monkeys, I suppose. But then,
the Monkeys were terrific in that they were a manufactured group who remade themselves. And turned into real musicians. Frankenstein's monster freeing itself and going off to have a life of its own.
It's alive. Okay, well, do you have any you said you got a couple of things on the plate or in the oven there? What's your next thing you've got coming out? So
there's the immediate one is there's another one which is just about to come out, which is Eldritch Prisoners, which is another one of those anthology ones with Matt Davenport and people. Then there's another one, which is, again, another anthology, which is with Phipps and Davenport and people. Working got to finish the trilogy of the God Queen and the fifth Harry Stubbs, Destroying Angels. So, yes, there's a lot. But also, I have been kept a bit busy in these last 6 months because there's been a bit of a war going on.
Ah, yes.
And suddenly, being an expert in obscure aspects of military technology, suddenly I find I'm in demand.
Is that your specialist area? Is it then?
Yeah, so I do military technology stuff. So I'm writing explainers for The Economist and doing stuff for popular mechanics and stuff.
And I guess that's as fast moving a field as any other technology these days, is it?
Everything. Well, this is incredible with Ukraine. It's something new every day. There's all sorts of things coming around.
Yeah.
So it's just following it and then writing it up has kept me quite occupied. So I haven't had as much time for fiction as I would have liked to have done. But hopefully that'll all finish soon and we'll be able to go back to life as normal. And get on with the important stuff.
You almost see films like Terminator now and those things, and they're almost, you think, well, how far are we off of that in reality? You know, was it Skynet supposed to go self-aware last year or something? Was that the date in the original film?
Yes, but I saw the other not long ago. They had them robot dogs with the sniper rifles on the back.
Lots of robot dogs around. Yep.
Yeah, it was just like, hang on a minute.
It's fascinating how robot dogs do trigger a particular phobic reaction when other types of robot don't.
Strange.
And I did some research into this, and there's it seems to be an uncanny valley effect, particularly because it looks like a dog, but it's not a dog. And it moves like a living thing, but it's not a living thing. And that does seem to trigger a lot of people. But yeah, those quadrupeds are, it's got so bad that Boston Dynamics, who are the big robotic people making them, they've categorically said they're not going to allow their stuff to be used for military use at all.
Right.
They're not going to allow anyone to stick weapons on it. However, they're not the only ones out there.
Well, they're good for them. I mean, that's a good thing. It's quite brave to take that sort of stand, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah.
I think the level of adverse publicity they were getting was probably a factor in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, robot dogs are scary, and they're coming.
Yeah. And it's a theme that we often harken back to on the show, is this idea of for our entertainment, whether we be producing it or consuming it, we're all very into horror and cosmic terror and all the rest of it. How do you balance out that out with the real world horrors that are going on? It's almost like one seems to be an escape from the other in a funny sort of way.
I think for the same reason that you need black comedy, I think you need to extract some entertainment out of it as well, as because it's there. You've got to deal with it somehow. And I think turning it into an entertainment form is certainly one way of doing it. But horror, it's exciting, it's thrilling. We like to be scared. You're alive.
Yeah.
Briefly, anyway.
Briefly.
Even if the other thing isn't.
Yeah.
Excellent. So where's the best place for people to see your work or to get in touch with you?
Right, if you find me on Facebook, the Facebook page is Shadows from Norwood. And you can find everything of mine is on Amazon. So David Hambling on Amazon. You will be able to get all the Harry Stubbs stories, all the Dulwich Horror related stuff, and the War of the God Queen. It's all on there.
Brilliant. We'll get some links up in the show notes, of course. So excellent. Thanks very much for coming in, David. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Now, there is one little task before we go. You might have noticed Tim lugging that huge bulbous object up the stairs and over his
watch
shoulder.
out, chaps. Let me get this on the bed. It's bulging this week. We haven't emptied it for a couple of weeks, have we? So here we go.
It's time for Dagon's sack. I shall have a quick rummage and see what we pull out. And we have a question from Susan in Aberdeen, and Susan asks, are you fans of Tolkien and have you been watching the Rings of Power series? Now, as soon as you get into Tolkien, discussions could go on for hours, right? And quite often do on some podcasts I listen to. But maybe a quick answer. What do we think? Who wants to go first on that one?
Well, I liked the books when I read them when I was younger. I haven't seen it And quite frankly, I'm bored of reading about it on Facebook. I'm bored of all my mates bickering about it. It's like, just stop it. Just stop it. So I'll wait till that's all died down, and then I'll watch it, and I'll make up my own mind.
I was a huge Tolkien fan. I used to reread Lord of the Rings every year. So for me, it was almost heretical when they brought out the movies. The first one I quite liked. I felt it went a bit downhill from there. So it's a bit bittersweet, really, because Tolkien has gone from being a really fringe minority interest, because you knew who your friends were. Your friends were the ones who'd read Lord of the Rings back in those days. These days, everybody knows how to pronounce Sauron. Yeah, and it's just it's like one of those bands that I liked before they were popular.
Yes.
Only I like their original stuff before they went commercial and sold out.
Yeah, you only like the first couple of albums before they got big. You can't believe the amount of conversations I've had like that this week, as I've been doing interviews. I've had so many interviews this week, like for my radio thing, and it's all been like that.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid that's exactly where I am with Tolkien. So, I hope the new series is a great success. I haven't watched it. I might see it at some point, and it's always good for the borders of the Tolkien Empire to get expanded. But I will never feel the love for that I would do for the original books.
Yeah, I think I largely agree. And with that band thing, when that really hit me was I went into Matalan once, which is a bit like a kind of Primark type shop, I guess. Mm. And they were selling Ramones T-shirts.
And people are wearing them who haven't even heard.
You can get Motorhead T-shirts in there now. Like Motorhead in Primark. It's like, what?
You can't wear that.
Like, what is happening to the world?
What's your favourite album? But yeah, like you, Lord of the Rings is something I've reread several times and listened to lots of the radio adaptations. And I think the film's the same thing. Yeah, I think the first one, but then I think they made so many little changes with like Faramir's character and other things.
Yeah. It
kind of veered off a little. The Hobbit was something else again. And I have seen the first 3 episodes of The Rings of Power now, and it's grown on me a little bit. I think it's got a little bit better each episode, but I'm thinking of it as like a fan fiction.
Yes. I think that sounds like exactly the right spirit, yeah.
So it's an enjoyable fantasy sort of series so far, better than Wheel of Time. I couldn't really get into that at all. But
I see, I haven't read any of that, so I thought I really enjoyed it. But my partner is a big fan, and she was just sitting there scowling at the TV. But I was like, "What? It's fine. I'm enjoying it." It needed more Trolloc action, though. There wasn't half enough Trolloc action. Oh, matron. Yeah.
It's great. It's great that these things work on the screen, but you do wish they would just come up with some original ideas.
Yeah.
And do things which were, designed to be visual, which are supposed to be conveyed in that way, because I don't know if you're ever going to catch the essence of Tolkien on the screen. Whereas if you were going to invent a whole new fantasy world, one that's, more visually oriented and less to do with Elvish grammar, then maybe you could do it.
Well, I mean, Robert E. Howe was a shoo-in for that. If there was a visual writer, then,
Oh, yeah.
There he is. But
Carl Edward Wagner as well. Yeah. I'm so shocked we haven't had, when we did Reflections for the Winter of My Soul, that would be such a great one to do as a film, because it wouldn't need many effects. It's quite short, it's concise, it's packed with action and atmosphere. There you go.
Oh, and we do have the Guillermo del Toro series coming out soon, don't we?
Indeed. I think
Hickman's Model and Dreams in the Witch House. There's good scientific story.
I mean, del Toro is obviously a huge Lovecraft fan, and I'm sure he'll do a great job of it. And it would be great if Lovecraft can get out there to a wider audience. But I don't know whether people are going to be reading the books or whether they're going to be wanting some more film adaptations, because that is now the way they consume things.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm really excited about the Graveyard Rats in that, because I love that story.
All right, thanks very much for that question, Susan. An interesting one, and I'm sure that debate will run and run as it is across social media. But
I've had to mute half of my friends list.
Oh, no, it's been so toxic, some of it. We are probably going to be doing a Tolkien special at one time. I wanted to take a look at Lord of the Rings from an English perspective, because I listen to a lot of Tolkien podcasts that are American, and I think they miss a lot of the nuances, particularly when it comes to class and some other factors.
I was going to say that. I mean, that's one of the fascinating things about it. It is so much of its time.
Yeah.
That you have a bloke who takes his gardener on an adventure,
yes. Yeah.
And his gardener is always tugging his forelock and saying "yes, sir," and never assuming social equality. I don't know anyone who isn't English whether they would necessarily get that.
Yeah, I don't think they pick up it, and the fact that the orcs are all cockneys is another thing.
Yes, and the troll, the trolls.
And the trolls, boys.
Yes. Oh, geezer. Yeah.
All right, thanks very much for coming in, David. It's been a real pleasure. We hope you can drop by again sometime.
Thank you, I'd love to.
And that's it for this visit, folks. I hear the bus is pulling up outside, so we're going to be departing Innsmouth before the sun goes down. David, of course, as one of our guests, gets to stay here the night, and as we always advise...
Oh, and use the trouser press.
Yes,
indeed.
Pushing the dresser up against the door, whatever it takes to keep yourself safe, but it's an experience.
Wouldn't miss it for the world.
Thanks for listening, folks, and I'd just like to give a big thanks to all our patrons as usual. If you'd like to join them and help us spread our tentacles further, do check out our Patreon site. When you sign up as a patron, you get a monthly copy of Innsmouth News, and you also get discounts and various other goodies if you subscribe at the higher levels. So, what are we looking at next time, Tim?
I believe we're looking at the Worms of the Earth, aren't we?
Oh, yes. I think one of Robert E. Howard's, I think it's one of his best stories.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
So we're in Dark Age Britain with Bram McMornan, a hint of Cthulhu mythos as well.
Indeed. Oh, yes.
Excellent. So I hope you can join us for that, folks. Thanks again, David. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.